In lands where sagas once echoed with tales of icy winds and Viking valor, different orders now reigned. The fury of battles and the freedom of the Norsemen had been replaced by the shackles of slavery, the scorching heat of the arena, and the roar of the crowd. Warriors, bound in chains, became captives of spectacle, their bodies mere instruments for the entertainment of a cruel public. They had fallen under the yoke of the Franks, who transformed them into gladiators, fighting for their lives to amuse the masses. Yet, make no mistake, in the hearts of these warriors, a fire still blazed, fueled by the Berserker's rage, whose victories were never marred by defeat. They were not merely slaves of the arena, but sons of the war god, embodiments of fury and storm. Every battle, every blow struck against Saxons, African warriors, and even traitors from their own lands brought them closer to something greater. A leader with burning eyes harbored a daring plan, one capable of shaking the foundations of the Frankish Empire. A rebellion, an unprecedented escape, a flame of freedom threatening to consume everything. The days of slavery were numbered, and despite the chains that bound them, a silent, all-consuming fire of vengeance ignited in the minds of these warriors. They would fight until their bones broke or until their freedom was bought. The arena and chains would be left behind, for something far greater was at stake. The Frankish Empire, the heart of one of the greatest powers of its time, seemed unyielding and invincible. Its stone walls and magnificent palaces reflected the might of a nation that held vast lands and peoples. The city of Aurelian, the empire's capital, rose above the horizon, its marble buildings and golden roofs gleaming in the sun. The streets teemed with merchants from distant lands and soldiers marching in strict rhythm. Luxury and discipline reigned here in perfect harmony. However, behind the walls of grandeur lay a dark side that drew the attention of the world's most fearsome warriors. The Frankish Empire was known for its thirst for blood and spectacle. At the very heart of the king's and royal family's power lay the arena, a vast space with black marble columns towering like giants. Here, prisoners of war, transformed into trophies, were kept. The arena was a school of death, where men and women of various nationalities, captured, imprisoned, and forced to fight to their last breath, were brought. Saxons, Africans, warriors from the East, all became gladiators whose lives were worth less than the entertainment of a thrill-seeking noble audience. With each battle, the crowd roared with the violence and bravery of those fighting for survival. Among the most infamous prisoners was a name that echoed like thunder: Halder, the Berserker. He had been brought to the Empire several years ago, a rare trophy of which the Franks were immensely proud. The only Viking captured alive, Halder was a legend among Norse warriors, a man whose eyes were as merciless as his blades. His capture symbolized not just a victory over one man, but over an entire culture. However, the Frankish pride in displaying Halder in the arena was short-lived. His legend, stronger than any chains, spread among the other prisoners, becoming a symbol of resistance. Even in prison, his presence served as a reminder that even the greatest warrior could be reduced to a mere possession in the hands of the powerful. Soon, new captives arrived, bringing with them the same flame of resistance that Halder had kept burning in the hearts of the prisoners. 4 Vikings from different corners of the Norse lands were brought to the Empire as trophies. The Empire had captured them and cast them into its arenas, eager to see them fight for their lives. Each had their own stories, their own exploits. But most intriguing among this new group was the presence of a young warrior, hailing from the cold lands of Vinland, with a gaze full of ancestral fury. His capture did not garner much attention at the royal court, but the arena commander, a cunning and cruel man, noticed something different in this group. They were unlike the other prisoners. Their demeanor was more arrogant, more silent, more dangerous. Each of the 4 Vikings carried something in their heart that made them more than just fighters, and those accustomed to quick and bloody victories from slaves would soon realize that something far greater was brewing in the depths of the Aurelian arena. In the gloomy dungeons where the prisoners were cast, the walls pressed down not only with their physical mass, but also with unseen shackles that bound their souls. Despite the grim necessity of fighting for survival, something more than mere instinct burned in their eyes. They carried within them the memory of their ancestors, of indomitable Vikings whose will knew no compromise. From the moment of their capture, the legend of these chained warriors began to be forged. However, contrary to the self-assured notions of the Frankish Empire, these Vikings were destined not to be mere extras on the stage of history, but architects of a silent revolution whose first sparks already smoldered in the shadow of an empire confident in its absolute power. Halder, born in a humble Viking village where the harsh mountain cold seemed to penetrate the very essence of its inhabitants, displayed an imposing stature from a young age, bolstered by remarkable strength and a determination bordering on obsession. His name, rooted in Old Norse and meaning stone, perfectly reflected his essence: hard, unbreakable, impervious to destruction. He grew up in the shadow of majestic mountains, where piercing winds tested the very flesh, and snowdrifts erected impassable barriers for anyone who lacked the resilience to survive in this hostile environment. Halder's father, a renowned Viking warrior, initiated him into the intricacies of martial arts from an early age, starting with axes and spears and progressing to the heavy sword that would later become his hallmark. Legends claim that on the day of his true transformation into a berserker, Halder single-handedly challenged the elements in the depths of the forest and returned with the head of a bear he had felled with his bare hands. This feat not only solidified his reputation as an invincible warrior, but also transformed him into a symbol of Nordic fury. Among Vikings, he was known as the Fury of the North, a warrior capable of entering a battle trance where his strength multiplied and his senses sharpened to supernatural limits. In combat, he became a living storm, carving a path through enemy ranks with an unstoppable rage. Wherever he trod, villages and clans bowed before his name. He participated in the greatest battles of Norse history, fighting against the English Empire, the Saxons, and even Slavic invaders. In Halder's hands, the sword became an extension of his soul, and every blow seemed infused with an ancient spirit, a spirit of vengeance and glory. However, beneath the outward display of untamed fury lay a strategic and calculating mind. He possessed an unerring instinct that allowed him to pinpoint the perfect moment to attack or retreat, and his understanding of warfare was profound and comprehensive. It seemed the gods themselves favored him, and he surveyed the battlefield with his head held high and unwavering confidence, believing in the inevitability of victory. When the Frankish Empire began its invasions of the northern lands, many naively believed it would be another futile attempt to conquer the harsh north. However, the Franks proved to be an adversary of a different caliber, and their military might, bolstered by an extensive empire, posed a threat even to the most fearless Vikings. Halder and his clan stood against these invaders, and he, as always, was ready for battle. But at a fateful moment, while he and his warriors were busy plundering a coastal village in Brittany, the Franks struck, catching the Vikings off guard. They employed ambush tactics, attacking under the cover of night when sleep had overcome the warriors. Halder was captured in a fierce struggle, where the soldiers of the Frankish Empire sought at all costs to seize and imprison the most valuable warriors. He was overwhelmed by superior forces, and his axes were torn from his hands as he desperately fought against the surging wave of iron and steel. Even while captured, Halder continued to fight until his strength waned, but the enemy's numerical superiority and the treachery of the shadows left him no chance. He was imprisoned, and news of his capture spread like wildfire in winter. The Frankish Empire, like a trophy, displayed Halder in the arena of Aurelian, showcasing the symbol of its victorious power. Igor, in contrast, came from a different background. Born on the western coast of Vinland, far from traditional Viking lands, Igor grew up in an environment as harsh as the nature surrounding him. His parents, members of a small Viking tribe, were renowned for their seafaring skills and mastery of hunting and fishing. However, Igor always felt a yearning for something more. While his peers dedicated themselves to hunting and perfecting their weapon skills, Igor dreamed of great achievements. He longed to become a celebrated warrior whose name would be spoken with awe in the clans, like that of a hero. From an early age, Igor distinguished himself with his agility and intellect. Although he did not possess the physical strength that the sons of other renowned warriors could boast, he more than compensated for this deficiency with speed and refined skill. His sword, small but sharp as lightning, was his preferred instrument. But Igor was not only a skilled warrior, but also a talented strategist. He understood that war was not just brute force, but also cunning and tactical mastery of the battlefield. As Igor grew older, he was increasingly noticed by leaders of other clans, who saw in him not only a promising warrior, but also a visionary, capable of leading his tribe to victory. By the age of 18, Igor, hardened by battles with renowned Norse chieftains, had earned a reputation as one of his clan's most formidable warriors. His virtuosic swordsmanship echoed throughout Vinland, and his name became a legend among merchants and seafarers. Yet, despite his martial prowess, the future remained a mystery to him. The young man was consumed by a thirst for great achievements, for adventures that would take him beyond the harsh waters of Vinland, onto the world's battlefields. His dreams stretched far beyond the borders of his native shores and settlements. Igor dreamed of heroic deeds, of voyages across the seas, and of immortalizing his name in distant lands. By fate, during a reconnaissance mission into the Frankish Empire, he was captured. Igor and his comrades fell into an ambush by superior enemy forces. While his companions desperately resisted, Igor understood that without Halder's experience, there was no chance of victory. The enemy captured him and brought him to Aurelian, but his courage and valor in battle did not go unnoticed. Like many before him, he was cast into the depths of the arena, where his story was to be rewritten, no longer as a Viking from Vinland, but as a gladiator, condemned to fight for his life in a foreign land. The capture of Halder and Igor, despite different circumstances, became a landmark event in the annals of the Frankish Empire. Halder, the Berserker, the only captured Viking, was considered a valuable trophy. His appearance in the arena demonstrated the Empire's superiority, pleasing the nobility and fueling the ambition of military commanders. Igor, a young and promising Viking from Vinland, symbolized that even the most skilled warrior could fall at the hands of the Franks. Together, they embodied something more than just war trophies. They became a symbol of resistance, unyielding even in chains and within the arena. Above the Aurelian arena, located in the heart of the Frankish city, the sun never seemed to set. The heat of battle and the roar of the crowd mingled with the smoke from the forges and the smell of blood that permeated the sand. The arena's stones, washed with the sweat and fear of prisoners, bore witness to brutal and bloody contests. The prison, a grim and lifeless structure, was a labyrinth of dark cells and damp corridors where prisoners were kept like objects, awaiting their fate. Halder, the Berserker, was thrown into the arena after his capture and quickly gained fame as a living legend. In his very first fights, his power was like an unstoppable fury, sweeping away all who dared to stand in his path. With an axe in hand, he was like a hurricane, a colossus crushing opponents with relentless precision. He knew no mercy, but was devoid of vanity. Haldr understood that survival in the arena required not only strength, but also cunning. The warrior who had sailed the seas and fought mighty foes had transformed into a war machine, an invincible legend in the Frankish arena. Every prisoner destined to fight him knew their chances were minimal. The Berserker fought not for victory, but to prove that no one could deprive him of his freedom. Among the other prisoners, he became an almost mythical figure, the embodiment of Norse fury. But despite his strength and power, Haldr suffered from captivity, longed for his homeland, and could not fight for a greater cause. In the quiet of his cell after each battle, he plunged into memories of his native lands, of snow-capped mountains and battlefields where death had meaning, where blood was shed for honor, not for entertainment. While Haldr remained undefeated, Igor, the young Viking from Vinland, arrived at the arena as a newcomer. He lacked Haldr's experience, but he possessed a natural talent for wielding a short sword, which made him agile and unpredictable. Igor, a promising warrior until then, found himself cast into a deadly game where every move was a test of endurance and courage. His first days in the arena became a harsh school. The cruel and inhumane fights quickly taught him that the only way to survive was to fight with the same ferocity as the others. However, Igor was driven by more than just a desire to survive. He had a purpose. Every blow, every victory, became part of a plan to escape and return home. The arena was not just a battlefield, but a stage where gladiators fighting for their lives became pawns in a cruel game. In the dark corridors of the prison, Igor carefully observed the other prisoners. Each had their own story, their own reason for being there. Some were victims of political intrigue, others yearned for revenge, but all were united by a common fate. They were mere toys in the hands of the Franks. But Igor did not succumb to despair. A fire of determination burned in his eyes, unquenchable as long as he had the strength to fight. He knew that to gain freedom, he needed to become not just a gladiator, but a threat, a force that could not be ignored. One day, marked by gladiator duels, fate brought Haldr and Igor together. The city streets, usually bustling with the energy of excited spectators, were this time permeated by an unusual atmosphere. The Frankish rulers had decided to subject the prisoners to a particularly cruel test, pitting them against the most dangerous mercenaries from all corners of the earth. Haldr and Igor were to prove their resilience in this ruthless slaughter. When Igor first stepped into the arena, his gaze instinctively fell upon Haldr, the legendary and undefeated champion, who loomed on the opposite side. Despite Haldr's fearsome reputation, Igor felt no paralyzing fear. He was gripped by an exhilarating premonition, similar to what berserkers experienced in their youth, a yearning to defy inevitable fate. He realized that to make history, he needed to fight the greatest of warriors, and Haldr, without a doubt, was that man. The two adversaries studied each other from a distance, exchanging no words. However, the palpable tension in the air bespoke a silent understanding that their paths were destined to cross. The experienced Haldr immediately understood that this young man was different from the other prisoners. He lacked the bestial rage that was characteristic of Haldr himself. But there was something more in him. A fire burned in Igor's eyes, tempered by years of struggle and resistance. Throughout the battle, their paths never crossed, but their gazes met in moments of lull, and Haldr could not help but notice Igor's cunning and agility. He realized that this youth was not just a recruit, but something more, a potentially dangerous opponent. After the duels ended, Haldr returned to his cell where his fatigue was compounded by oppressive loneliness. Yet, he could not shake the feeling that Igor's appearance in the arena was no accident. He was a harbinger of something new. something that could change the course of events. Halder did not yet know that this young Viking, recently captured, would become a crucial link in his escape. Their destinies were bound by the necessity to fight, but in the moments of silence, something more began to grow between them. Their first encounter was just the beginning, and the arena, that place of death and despair, was to become the field where the threads of their fates would intertwine. Days in captivity stretched endlessly, filled with hardship. Contrary to the Franks' expectations, the time spent in dark cells did not break the prisoners' spirits. On the contrary, it forged something deeper within them, something beyond the Franks' control. In the silence of the cells, where the echoes of the arena's screams still resonated in the corridors, Igor and Halder began to exchange glances more frequently. They were no longer just strangers. As the weeks passed, their gazes, once wary and distant, were accompanied by nods and brief remarks, and the distance between the two warriors gradually lessened. Igor, endowed with natural cunning, was the first to approach. From the very beginning, he understood that Halder was not just an arena legend. In Halder, there was something more than in other prisoners, a strength of spirit, an unwavering confidence based on experience and leadership qualities. One day, as they sat in the same cell, Igor decided to speak. "Have you thought about anything beyond this place?" he asked quietly, as if fearing the prison walls might overhear their conversation. Halder, always cautious, looked at the young man impassively, but something flickered in his eyes when he heard the question. He understood what Igor meant, and for a moment, he felt a spark of hope ignite within him. "About escape? That thought crosses everyone's mind here," Halder replied in a deep voice. "But it's harder than it seems. We're not just held by chains and bars, we're constantly watched, and no one leaves this place without paying a high price." Halder then fell silent, as if assessing Igor, trying to understand his intentions. The young Viking, with his characteristic boldness, did not flinch. "What if we change the rules? If we gather those who are here, those who have the courage to fight, we can break free together as a single army." He knew that convincing Halder would not be easy, but he felt he had to choose the right words. Halder looked at him, pondering his proposal. He was not inclined to trust anyone, especially inexperienced youths. But there was a fierce determination in Igor's words that reminded him of his own youth. He knew what it was like to be a trapped warrior, yearning for freedom. "Do you truly believe that's possible?" Halder asked with doubt in his voice. Igor replied without hesitation, "I know it's possible. You have the strength and I have the strategy. Together, we can do it." The confidence in Igor's words made Halder see a possibility that had previously seemed unimaginable. Days stretched on in an atmosphere of tense silence, permeated by hidden intentions. Igor and Halder found opportunities to meet between battles, during rare moments of respite when the gods' vigilance waned. They shared intimate stories of their distant lands and the battles they had endured. Halder spoke of his triumphs on the battlefields, the agony of captivity, and how he, a berserker by nature, could never have imagined himself as a prisoner. Igor, in turn, recounted his youth in Vinland, where freedom was an inherent part of his existence, and how the mere thought of submission to any empire offended his beliefs. Trust between them grew gradually, as if built brick by brick. Halder, despite his hardened and stern nature, began to see Igor as a potential ally. Igor, meanwhile, recognized in Halder not only a fearless warrior, but also a leader capable of guiding them to liberation. In the stillness of the night, in whispers, they formulated their plans. The task ahead was not easy. They realized that the prison was full of other captives, each imprisoned for their own reasons. However, there was something more in Halder's gaze and the sparkle in Igor's eyes. They believed that together they could break the chains binding them. The plan began to take concrete shape. The first step was to observe the other prisoners, identifying those who retained their courage and had not succumbed to their fate. Among the captives were other Vikings, captured during raids, as well as representatives of other peoples, united by a thirst for freedom. Gradually, Igor and Halder established a secret network among these prisoners. They met under the cover of night, when the prison walls were shrouded in darkness, exchanging coded signals. With each meeting, more warriors joined their cause. Tension mounted daily. The prison was filled with whispers, hushed voices, secret plans, and promises of vengeance. Halder, the renowned warrior, and Igor, the young and ambitious, became leaders of the underground movement. Every action, every word, was part of a complex puzzle about to be completed. However, while the prisoners prepared, the guards remained vigilant, and the risk of exposure remained high. One night, when the moon hid behind a thick veil of clouds, Halder and Igor gave the signal. The plan was initiated, and a silent movement began in the dark corridors of the prison. Each warrior understood what was at stake. Freedom was close, yet simultaneously threatened. There was no time for hesitation. With hearts pounding wildly in their chests, and to the accompaniment of chains dragging on the stone floor, the warriors prepared for their escape. Everyone knew that this night would change everything, but as they lined up in the shadows, ready to take the decisive step, a question hung in the air: would they achieve freedom, or would inevitable doom await them? Night enveloped the city in darkness. Moonlight barely pierced through the thick clouds. The wind swept through the streets of Aurelian, carrying the scent of the sea and the hope of freedom. Inside the prison, the warriors prepared for their escape. Their chains clanked like a silent lament, but determination burned in their eyes. Igor, the young Viking from Vinland, and Halder, the invincible Berserker, led the group of prisoners ready to change their destiny. This was not merely an escape, but a true revolution, forged from the steel of their swords and the strength of their convictions. The plan was in action, and the warriors, like shadows, moved with astonishing precision, knowing all the guards' blind spots and secret passages etched in their memory. The sounds of muffled footsteps and whispers echoed through the prison corridors as a small group of prisoners gathered in the farthest part of the cells. Every step was fraught with risk, but the thirst for freedom propelled them forward. They reached a secret prison exit where a faint ray of light showed them the way. The iron door, which had seemed impenetrable, creaked open, and the warriors, united by a common goal, burst onto the streets of Aurelian, trying not to attract the attention of the guards. The plan was simple but daring: reach the port, seize a ship, and sail to distant lands. But as often happens, betrayal lay in wait. When they were almost at their goal, one of the prisoners who had joined them did the unthinkable. Approaching the city's outskirts, this man, trembling with fear, screamed at the top of his lungs. His cry, like a knife, pierced the night's silence, echoing through the deserted streets and attracting the guards' attention. "They're escaping! They're escaping!" Igor's heart froze for a moment. Betrayal had occurred, and the man's scream immediately drew soldiers, blocking their path to the ship. But Halder, as always, was ready for battle. The Berserker's rage awakened within him, erupting with a primal roar. He charged the soldiers with the fury of a hurricane, his axe slicing through the air with a deadly whistle. One soldier tried to attack him head-on, but Halder disarmed him with a single, precise blow and brought him to the ground, crushing his skull with the axe handle. "You cannot stop us," his voice boomed, powerful as thunder amidst the quiet streets. The echo of battle resonated through the city as the valiant Vikings swiftly advanced toward the port. Halder, consumed by an unstoppable surge of courage, was becoming a living legend. The fight at the harbor was fierce. Upon reaching the shore, the warriors saw the ship, but they were met not only by favorable winds. Frankish soldiers had taken defensive positions around the vessel, their spears and swords gleaming ominously in the moonlight. The battle began, and the clang of steel mingled with fierce war cries. Halder and Igor, along with the other prisoners, fought with the ferocity of wild beasts. The gladiator arena was a distant past. Here, at the port, in the thick of battle, they fought for freedom, for their future, for their honor. Halder, like a raging beast, carved his way through enemy ranks, showing no mercy. Igor, skillfully wielding his short sword, cut down opponents with impeccable precision. However, the battle dragged on, and fatigue began to take its toll on the warriors. The number of Frankish soldiers seemed endless, and the Vikings' strength gradually waned. Suddenly, with a cry that made the air tremble, Halder turned to his comrades. "Go! Run to the ship! I will stay!" A grim determination was etched in his gaze. He knew there was no more time. "You have a chance to survive. I will die here so you can escape." Igor, with a heavy heart and a premonition of inevitable loss, approached Halder. "No, Halder, I cannot abandon you." But the Berserker, with incredible strength, pushed Igor away. "Go! I have lived my life. You have much more to do. Live!" Halder's gaze was unyielding, and Igor understood that arguing was useless. The sacrifice was inevitable. Casting a final glance at the Berserker, Igor turned and ran to the ship with the other warriors. The wind whistled in the sails as they hoisted them, but as they sailed away, Igor could not help but look back. There, in the center of the battle, stood Halder, surrounded by dozens of enemy soldiers, still fighting with furious rage. Every blow landed, but his axes grew heavier, his strength failed, and finally, in the very heart of the carnage, Halder fell. His body was strewn with enemy corpses, but a smile was frozen on his face. A victor's smile. He had fulfilled his mission. As the ship sailed away from the shore, Igor took one last look at the city. His heart was filled with sorrow at the loss of a great warrior. They had escaped, but at a tremendous cost. The sea carried them further and further from the lands of the Frankish Empire, and the winds of freedom bore them north to Vinland. For many years, they sailed the seas, stopping at islands to hunt and resupply, steadily heading north. Halder's spirit never left them. Upon reaching Vinland, Igor settled there and began a new life. He married and had a son, whom he named Halder in honor of the man who had given his life for their salvation. In time, Igor became a respected leader, revered by all. He was remembered as the Viking who survived the Frankish Empire, but most of all as Halder's son, the Berserker. He waged wars, conquered lands, and left behind a legacy that echoed through the centuries. But he never forgot Halder's sacrifice, the man who, in a final act of courage, unleashed unyielding fury to grant freedom to all the others.